Hi everyone, welcome to this tutorial. To give you an overview of what this tutorial will be about is we're going to create a very fake kind of social media advert for a chocolate product. So we're going to do a multi-shot advert. So I'll just quickly show you. This advert, by the way, is the simplest advert you will ever see. It's just one chocolate egg that breaks open and 3 camera moves, and then we change flavors. It's the most basic thing. So if you're watching this thinking that's really boring, I know how to do this already, that's fine. The tutorial is not about procedural generation of eggs or assigning materials and stuff, or even getting the best fluid sim or even the best shaders. It's more about just a workflow so that we can pass through Houdini in this new environment. And I've decided to work in one Houdini file, but in different LOP networks that represent different stages of the VFX pipeline. So the idea is to see how organized I can be and how kind of department orientated I can be within my workflow. So we'd first start off as a quick overview in assets, and I create another LOP network, and I know my asset is going to be called chocolate egg. So I name it chocolate egg, and I start putting all my LOPs down. So you're presented with quite a large environment here. And from very top to very bottom, this will allow you to generate the chocolate egg within a SOP network and author that into the component builder and issue different geometry variants. And some of them are just for visualization. So we'll have an unbroken egg, we'll have a closed egg, if you can see that's fractured. Then we'll have an open egg like so. Then we'll return some things from effects and we'll do an open egg with liquid in, and that's going to assist us kind of shading and things like that. But before we can get to the effects part, there's a few other things that we'll need to do. So you may notice I can switch between these, and they will change. Basically, they'll change to an effects version as well. So that's pretty much what we're going to do. We're going to create 2 flavors. We're going to go in and produce 2 material flavors, and I'll talk about that in just a second. And then we're going to set up a little thing that will allow us to review the asset and author the asset and publish and test it. So we can basically add the cameras and look through the camera like so, and then define the frame range we want. So we can say this is just going to be like a turntable scene. So we can set the variant well. So the first thing we'll do is you'll notice we're looking through the render cam, and that's declared up here. And I'm going to set the frame range to just be 50 frames. So I'm going to start at 1001 and end at 1051. And I'm going to click on this button, and it's going to update my timeline like so. And then I'm going to choose my variant. So here we have variants set. Now you may think, why is this say at TOPS material variant? If I middle click, you'll see it is returning something, and that is related to down here. So first things first, we're going to spin the asset with an expression, and I'm going to go through all this in great detail, graph the lights in, add some ref balls if we really want, and graph the floor in, set up some basic comp and rendering settings like so, and we can choose between different render settings for speed. So this is like kind of the authoring and the Lookdev of the asset. So this thing will spin for like 50 frames and just spin the asset. So we can do that, or we could basically stop spinning the asset and we could spin the lights and things like that. We can offset the rotation of our asset, and we can kind of automate all this rendering as well. So what you're actually doing pretty much from this point onwards is just all optional. This is just one way of doing it, but it'll allow you to kind of review your product a little bit more in a render. So you can render like the turntable really fast without motion blur and just get a feel for it and have all of the AOVs that you would require and take a look at all of those as well. So that's going to allow us just to kind of work completely on one asset using this kind of template. So if I go back up, if we had another object in our scene, we could use a very basic template like so, and we could throw this in and rename this and start working on the Lookdev and the authoring of another model as well. So it doesn't really matter what the model is, it's just you kind of have a set structure and a set template and things. So this has not been used, but this is the one that's active. So once that's authored and published, we would then move to layout. So what I like to do in the layout is like to set a structure. You see on the right and then on the left, you can see I'm just setting a USD structure to put some cameras, geometry and lights in there. And then I'm going to set like the frames per second and the start and the end frame. I'm going to set this to be, well, I've set it $F end, but you could hard code this so it's always the same. But I'm just going to set this to, the end frame here, like so. And then I'm going to define some just render settings as well, which should actually be 1280 by maybe 720, like so. So we don't have any camera yet or anything. And then I'm going to put in 3 cameras like so. And the cameras are going to be named basically OS. So it's kind of like just going through and naming the cameras. So essentially I'm going to animate 3 cameras and we're going to go through all this in great detail. So we'll have this shot control, which will allow me to look at the render settings and move between 3 shots automatically like that. And that's all because of the shot edit control. Then I can actually bring in a backdrop, which I made very basic, add a material. I can bring the chocolate egg in once and twice and do a different variants for open and broken. And then I can kind of like add that in and get a basic layout of my egg. So you can see this looking at the proxy geometry and you'll see the egg does actually change. It just remove camera. Look. Oh, wait, sorry. The egg will eventually switch eggs, but we're going to do that in animation. So just to give you a preview of what animation department did, is they switched the egg, and you'll see the visibility switching up here, and it opens up. And then effects just basically replace that geometry here, and just getting some proxy stuff here as well. So this is all kind of a little bit further down the line. So that's kind of what I'm doing in layout. Then in animation, so if you notice, I just labeled them like 1, 2, 3, just to kind of help move through. So we're actually in animation now. We're going to import the layout. So we're going to import from here. So if I click on this, we're going to be importing this layout. I can go back like so, and it's going to be importing this stream. We can also publish our cameras and bring them in this way if we want to test. That's kind of what the publish will be doing. So we're going to just import this live and move this into another LOP network. And whatever we're doing here, we're going to export it and just test it in here like that. So it's going to show you the kind of like the animation. So I should be able to kind of look at the shots like so and add in the animation and still jump further down the hierarchy and jump further down the hierarchy and have a look at what the effects department we're doing as well. So what I would do is in the animation LOP network, in this LOP area, I would bring in the whole hierarchy and I would put another LOP network and call it shot 000. The reason I'm not giving this a shot number like 10, 20, and 30 is because my animation is the same across all the 3 shots. So I've decided just to put everything in one location, and we'll talk about this again in more detail. And then I'm going to animate, but this animation in this shot is dedicated to the chocolate egg. So I've just named it chocolate egg, and it's another LOP network. And then as you'll see, the to shots basically was this, and it will come into here. And then I'll set in some paths and things, and we'll start to get into some Houdini stuff where we will basically import into Houdini surface operators into SOPS and work on our animation And then we'll add even more animation in LOPs just to spice things up a little bit. And then we'll animate the pruning of one piece of geometry hiding against the other, so you can't really see the change. So I'll just turn this off, this stage frame drives playback range, while we're in here, and I'll just make sure that this is actually set to the, well, that's probably okay, the correct thing. So you can see it's one variant and then the other one is revealed. It's just the visibility thing using the prunes. We'll then bake this out and it will go here, and then we can choose to like have this live or cached. In this case it's cached. We'll then move up again and up again, and we'll go, we didn't use any CFX in this. I was going to have some like tinfoil wrapping paper on here, but kind of run out of time. And then same for the effects. I'm going to import straight from animation, so it's importing from state from this part here. So if I click on this, it's just importing this cached thing here, like so. So if I go back, it's going to import in here, and again I have the LOP network and then the asset I want to do the effects on, and then I go ahead and kind of do the same thing and I implement my effects. And inside of here we've got like a fluid setup for doing the kind of the pouring the caramel stuff inside, and we'll talk about all this again in a little bit more detail. And we'll save all this out and just bring this here just to test it's all working. And if you notice, we have a proxy geometry as well for the fluid. So there is actually this is the proxy geometry, not the renderable geometry, which is the purpose, should I say. So if we went to final render, it replaced it with quite a dense thing, and then go to preview, it's nice for the viewport. So this is quite nice. So it's kind of, we're working in the effects department under a shop and dedicated to a certain asset. So this could be as many fluid versions as you want. You could copy and paste this and it's going to be all kind of procedural and saved to the correct place. And we'll discuss all this later. And you could add secondary effects like fracturing, and it can just be like layered in to the sub layers. So when we've published all of our effects, we want to send these out. We would probably send them out to, well, whoever wanted to look at them really. So normally it'd be lighting, but animation could take a look. You know, we could kind of have a look at the master scene of our animation here, and we could add another layer of effects on top. So we could add some kind of fracturing on there as well. So if we're just looking at the fluid effects, but we could add another fracture or something. We're going to keep this really simple, and I'm opting to do it this way. So I'm kind of jumping in and out of these master LOP networks, which then kind of isolate a shot and then an asset. And then I use that to kind of do all my work in there in an organized way. So we're still working it under one USD structure, but we're just pulling in different parts of the USD structure into different parts of Houdini and moving back and forth like that. And finally, then we set this up for lighting. And as you can see, I'm importing the live layout again. I'm not bringing in the cache versions here, bringing in the animation and the effects. Then I'm adding some lights in, and then I'm actually caching the scene out so I can actually break everything and it will still kind of move back and forth. Then I'm going to render all 3 shots with some render settings, and I can choose my render settings as I want, and I'm going to automatically render all of those shots using TOPS, and we can have different passes. So I chose to render just the egg and not the background, and then I could render the background separately as well, and then just fix all that in comp. So the actual render here is really rubbish advert render. By the way, I'm not particularly proud of any of this, like in terms of the look, but it was mainly how quickly can I knock up a project and how would I stay organized in one scene. Now, in the past, I have tried many things. I've had different Houdini files for different different things, and tried to derive my naming from that. And then I've also had one huge network, which if you imagine adding all of these different things together, you're going to end up with an epic network, which is it's, if you'd like that way of working, there's nothing wrong with it. But I just wanted a way of like partitioning off the departments in my head and kind of almost approving things. So I could say, yeah, I'm going to work on the asset today, and this is all approved, and you know, I can publish this, and now I can pass that on to layout, and they can bring this in. Or even if I'm not happy with the model, I can publish my progress and pass it on to layout, and they can keep working on it. So, for example, I'm not happy with the Lookdev or, you know, the effects, but I was able to kind of get something out really quite fairly quickly. In, I think it was about a day to kind of get something out. So, you know, you can kind of render a quick turntable and have a look, and you could spin your lights. And this is coming from the modeling department, this render. So I'm referring to the different departments, but I am kind of like doing everything, but I'm kind of doing it this way as well, so that you can keep quite organized in your work. And then if you do work with other people, we'll start to discover more about USD and how the layering is important and opinions and things like that. So if this is something that interests you, please do stick around, and we'll now make our way through each one of these, excluding these guys. Eventually we will have another project which is more advanced, and there'll be more detailed tips and more additional tips that are not present in this tutorial that will be dedicated to each department as well. And we'll be doing like multi-layer effects, where we'll be having maybe some packaging ripping off, and in the effects we'll have not only fluid but maybe particles flowing around and some fracturing. But this is like the base for my tests case. So if this is something you want to watch, please subscribe and stay tuned for the next few videos. Thank you. Right, let's get started. So we'll start by creating an asset. So usually when you start a project, you will be given some concept art or storyboard, something like that. In upcoming projects, we will be doing just that. But for now, I don't have anything, so I just kind of found a quick image of a chocolate egg and just went and just created an asset. So I used this LOP network called assets, and I created a LOP network called chocolate egg. And I have like a basic template I may have shown you earlier that is pretty much this, but the basic template wouldn't normally have loads of these. These are going to happen as we make the model. So the first thing you do is you just work on making the model. So I would work in this SOP network, and I procedurally modeled an egg. So what I did is I basically created a sphere using the lab sphere generator. Then I just cleared away any junk I didn't want from it. So yep, you might think why, but it just gives really nice topology, and it was kind of okay. Then I just created an attribute called height. Now you can do this many ways. It's up to you how you want to do this, but it's just going to kind of give this fall off here. Then I'm going to use a soft transform, move the pivot down with the what you call the dy. So if I press enter, you see the pivots here, and I'm going to use a soft transform using this attribute just to kind of create this kind of shape. And then I just create another height attribute, do another soft transform, and just kind of do this with the egg. So it's just nothing fancy, and add some normals like so, and then just add some UVs. So just like that, again, very quick. Then I think I just stick it to the space 3. I just stick this to the on top of the origin here, like so. So that was space 3 just to get that, and then space 1 to come back. And I'm holding space bar down and left clicking just to kind of orbit around this object. Press escape to come out of the kind of interactivity state that's controlled by the selection of this node. So there's like kind of like the final model, so nothing too fancy. Now along here, it's just a little bit of experimentation where I actually, I don't know why it says to cops, that kind of a little bit old school, but I think that goes there. May be wrong. Let me just think this through. Maybe I'll keep that on there. Oh yeah, it is going to COPS. So I just created some color and then to COPS. And before I went to COPS, I decided to try to create like a pattern that was going to bake the high res deformation. So I just created like a chocolate egg pattern, and you can go nuts with this. I was going to use the labs map baker like I did previously to bake this kind of point unified noise, and all I'm doing here is creating unified noise with Whirly Cellular set to this, and then fit this and clamp it and then displace it, and then just try that. I was going to smooth it a little bit, soften the normals, and then obviously this is too heavy for production, but you could bake out a displacement map or a normal map. And then I realized, well, I probably use Copernicus, so I sent the actual model out here to Copernicus, scattered some points. So for the COP network, I didn't do anything too fancy. I'm not really Copernicus expert at the moment. It's on my to-do list, but I used the SOP import to grab the points that we just pointed to. And I'm going to rasterize them into UV space. And then I'm going to use this OTL. Now this is part of a tool from within a repository that I found. So just going to give a shout out to Kabush Pasha. I hope I don't butcher your name. But he built these nice Git repository full of tools called Houdini SD, and the one I was using was the I think it was the LZ scatter, or so I think it was LZ Voronoi. So that's kind of what that is. So I've just put that into my hotel directory, and it's very handy actually. You've just kind of did the job instantly. All I had to do is kind of create a little bit of a blend. Then I just clamped this, probably okay, equalized it. And I'm going to make a height map. So that's the height map that's essentially going to go out. So you can bring in the model and you can take a look at it, and you need to have more subdivisions on this thing. But essentially what I'm going to do is have this go into my material X displacement. So if you press U again, you can see that, you can see the egg, and I've not got very many subdivisions on here because this is like a kind of material trick. You have to have the material thing on in the viewport, because I think 5 makes it look kind of nice, but you'll notice it's very dense. So that's why we're going to opt to use this as a texture map anyway. So that was just a quick about the Copernicus texture map. So if you remember, we kind of take the height map here. This is going to give you that texture pattern here that you can see, and it's going to be a texture map. So this will produce a height map. That's pretty much what this little side bit is. So we'll just keep that in mind, that we did create a procedural texture rather than baking high res geometry onto low res. So we have the model, and then I'm going to create a poly extrude, and I'm just going to create a little mountain. I'm just going to make the surface a little bit uneasy, like so. So we've got the chocolate surface, and I'm just going to create like a thickness. So I'm going to blur the normals and then soft peak this in a little bit. So I'm just kind of creating an uneven inside to the chocolate. So there's so many ways you can do this. Didn't think I used the ray in the end. So, and then I did another soft peak where I just kind of pulled out this. And then I did this boolean operation. So my mouse is going a bit crazy. I did a boolean operation, and it's set to essentially subtract A from B. You'll get this kind of like new model here. Then I'm going to divide that to give it a bit more detail, and then I'm going to color the geometry based on some group names, so chocolate surface and chocolate inside. And then I'm going to do an auto UV space 5 to kind of get the inside and the outside of this chocolate egg. Then I'm going to do this side is pretty much preparing, cleaning up the attributes that I don't need anymore. Creating the normals, creating a rest position, and then just testing the attributes are there. And then I'm going to create an attribute which is an integer, a primitive for the inside and the outside, because might use that in shading later on. So if you clip through this, you'll see that we've got this kind of thick object that's unbroken at the moment. And that's going to be my chocolate group there. It's going to be my chocolate unfractured model there. So then to fracture this, I took the bounds of the model and I created a grid, created a mountain, set to this, did an attribute blur to blur this out because I'm going to do another mountain on top of this, and I'm going to just remesh this like so, match it to the center of the bounding box of the egg, which is this guy. And then I'm just going to do a poly reduce because this will be like the inside of the kind of caramel. So, oh, sorry, I've kind of deviated down this side. So this is kind of like the fracture, the cutting tool that we've made here, like so. Then I'll do a Boolean operation and you'll see that it's fractured the egg. And then I'm going to take the chocolate sides and color them. So if space 5, you'll see we don't have any UVs, but then if I UV the sides and do a UV layout, we can kind of get a little UV for that and that as well. So that's that, like so. I'm just going to sort the points in the X direction. I don't think I really use this. I'm going to create this assemble and it's just going to give me like it's just going to give me, what is it going to give me now? A piece 1 and 2, and I'm going to use that to animate later on. Could have done this by just grouping them and naming them. So I'm going to create this chocolate left using the piece name. It's going to be called bits. I'm going to call this chocolate right. It's called bits. So you'll notice one's got a value of 1 and one's got a value of 0. Then I'm going to crease the edges. I don't think I used that. I'm going to create a final group, and then I'm going to do an attribute cleanup so I don't have any junk. I just have this kind of chocolate egg here. And then I'm going to create some normals on the chocolate. Like so, if I go into smooth shaded, and then I'm going to create normals for the I'm going to create some normals for the inside, and I'm going to and some normals for the side, and then I'm going to create a brand new rest position. So that's going to be my rest position there. And group expand. This didn't really get used, these attribute sides, and these are attributes that I don't think I really use them. Not really. I think you can really see them. Yeah, I didn't really use the attributes. I was just playing around with creating a fall of attribute and stuff, but they didn't really get used. The main point here is that you've got this kind of fractured version of the model with some UVs. And then that got saved here, and I'll talk about the saving in just a second. And then for the caramel, I used the same cutting tool, but I poly reduced this because I didn't want this caramel here. So if you look the inside over here did a UV layout, which I think, yep. Then I did a booleans, and then I did the same thing where I kind of just colored this just for visualization, and then did a UV space 5, and you can see I've got like this caramel temporary model. So I did the same thing where I assembled to get pieces, and then I did a fluid left and a fluid right attribute called bits. So you essentially have these two bits that are the same as the chocolate. So if you remember, we've got like chocolate and the inside now fractured. Cleaned up the attributes, created a normal, created another rest position, and then created a name called fluid, and then saved this out. So you end up with the fluid and the chocolate. So that's pretty much what you've got. So you have this unfractured and fractured kind of model to play with. So you can take a look at that. In terms of the way I save these things, this is just totally down to me. I have a null here, which I've created an asset location, and that will just go straight to my modeling department, and the op name, if I middle click, it's just chocolate egg, like so. Then I'm just using a version, so all of these concatenate down to this path here. So if I middle click, it's kind of going all the way down into this project structure. So all my like modeling department asset stuff will go in this chocolate egg project here. So in this patron, and then chocolate egg in assets, asset, there will be modeling, and then there'll be the chocolate egg and its geometry, and they'll all get named after the piece that they represent, and there'll be a version, and then there'll be the piece there. So this path here, this entire null is kind of controlling that. So you can see that this here is referencing the results of that, and it just means I have to set that once, and then I can procedurally say $OS, which is going to resolve to Choco, and then the version, and then it just kind of goes /$OS. It's going to put them in a folder. So that's pretty much all that is doing. So it's kind of going all the way down into here, and it just kind of keeps it tidy, I guess, and relevant to this asset with version control. And I can just experiment with them, because you're kind of going to be going back and forth with this and dipping in and out of like Houdini world and Solaris world while you Lookdev in and adding attributes. Because like I said, I hesitated a little bit, because I think I put some attributes down there quickly and realized I might not actually have used them in the shading. But yeah, so there is just really basic explanation of how I did this like egg. So now that's all saved to disk, we can explode this view, and I can use the attribute bits. So if I go wireframe and I just show you the bits attribute here, and I just color that in, you can see what you're viewing here is in the wireframe, you can see the chocolate surface and the higher res cutting plane here, chocolate surface, and then the inside caramel, and it all sits flush, and it's all being moved out via this bits attribute. So I can just move it out. So I was actually going to use that for like baby animation and stuff. So you can animate based on attributes, but if I did it again, I'll probably just name these left and right and just have the same, do something with the names, and I could animate in LOP level rather than SOP level as well. But we do a bit of both. So this animation, this position here doesn't go anywhere. This network does not go anywhere. So what's happening now is these out nulls here, they do go somewhere. So if you press U and we look at the unbroken, you can see this little brown, is it brown line there? And that's because we've got this few dependencies for selected. So it's telling me something's coming from here. I don't know if it tells you what it is, but you can kind of go in and see this object merge, and you can see that's referencing this unfractured and out fluid. So if I just click on this, you'll see I've gone back into the SOP network, and it's viewing this. I can kind of go backwards and end up where I started. So I can kind of go in here and I can kind of space G and see it's kind of referencing this. So I'm kind of referencing my live and then save to disk SOP network in the component builder. So essentially it's just going to bring in the unbroken, and then it's going to bring in the closed asset as well. So you can see I'm just referencing a slightly different area of that SOP network here. So Choco out and fluids, if I click on there, you'll see we were referencing stuff down here. So I can go back again. So we essentially are going to use the component builder to bring in two versions. Okay, I'm just going to click on that and pretend this doesn't exist at the moment. I'm going to talk about this in just a second. So I knew that the egg was going to be fractured, and I decided to fracture the egg how I liked the fracturing, and I could go in and change that and save this and change the fracturing and stuff. But if you're going to be doing that, then that will affect effects, because, well, it's going to be used as a collision object, but it won't really affect layout and it won't really affect animation because of the way I'm doing the kind of the opening of the egg and stuff. So we're not going to change this just now because we've already got the effects in place, but you probably wouldn't have the effects at this stage anyway. So I've chosen to do two assets that render the same. They look the same when they're swapped back and forth. And you can see that's working because of the crappy thing I did here, where you can see the egg switches variants. So there's unbroken and broken, and that just works. I did a little bit of back and forth between modeling and Lookdev and lighting, and there was a bit of iteration process through and a bit of forward thinking about how would I do this. And rather than giving this to effects to break the egg, if you think about, if we just open the egg, so the open variant is the same as the closed. So it's this and this, but inside here I've just created an explode view using the bits. So as you can see, I can open this like so. And then I've just done a transform. That's all. And a reference copy, and just did a negative on the pivot, I think I did, and maybe a negative on the transform here as well. So it just, whatever I do on this side, it mirrors on the opposite side. So I could kind of open it up. You'll see it's poly reducing because I'm creating a proxy as well for both the fluid and the chocolate. So there's the default. So if you're not aware, the component builder allows you to kind of create the purpose. So you can have the render purpose, which is this side, and then the proxy. So you can create your own proxy geometry. So I've chosen to use two poly reducers to just isolate different parts of this asset. So I'm taking the outer chocolates and poly reducing that, and then taking the inside and poly reducing that just for the viewport. So that's pretty much what the open thing is, because I thought it'd be nice just to kind of look dev and see the inside. So we chose to fracture this in modeling because it's like a hero fracture, and then maybe later on effects will do more fracturing. But the reason I chose to do this right at the asset level is it gives me a little bit of control over creating some UVs and authoring some materials and some procedural kind of texture and shading around the edge of the chocolate there. And it just seemed easier because I'm going to do that right here all in this network rather than, and also we wanted to do a hero break, so it made sense. But if we did eventually do a project where this is fractured in effects, then we would have to think about who's going to be responsible for like shading the new parts, or the new edges to the new fractured geometry and things. And it can be effects, or you could do some back and forth tests where you have a shader that is procedurally picking up an attribute that effects produce, and effects would just UV stuff, and it all just looks good. So you would have a bit of back and forth with that. But in this case, this just splits open. As you see, there is no micro fracturing, just to keep it simple, but there is a little bit of like procedural shading going on the edge there as well. So it's just proceduralism, and it's not great, but it's just a placeholder for now, just to kind of keep it simple and move through the process and then like sketch out the idea. So we now have the two assets we need and like a temporary one here that I wouldn't even publish to the final thing. And same for the effects, which we'll talk about the effects. So the effects, we just took a frame from the end of our effects and we brought that in. So we could, we created a proxy geometry, you know, for the purpose as well, and we could switch that out as well. So just to move back in, we created this unbroken model here. And I'm not going to treat this as a subdivision surface for this, or this, or this, because you'll notice I've got this down here, and I'm going to just treat the chocolate as a subdivision bilinear, and I'm going to create the dicing, and I'm going to improve the dicing on just the chocolate area, and I'm going to do that for all of the variants. So you can control the subdivision on a per primitive and the dicing on a per primitive level using these render setting nodes as well. So they usually would be the same. So I've done it that way. I'm not sure if I do it down here. I think it might complain that if I try to move these in one go, it could potentially complain. Guess there's one way to find out. Let's take a look. Y. Let's just go Y. Drop that in, and then let's just hook that up. Does that work? Does it complain? Maybe it didn't complain. Maybe that would be a better approach, so you can control it once, because nothing changes on here when this variant switches. So if I set this working variant open, what you're looking at here, I can set this to closed. It seems to be working. And unbroken, and I can kind of get the same subdivision because it's going to asset geo render chocolate, which is asset geo and then render chocolate. So it's the actual render purpose that we're working on, this primitive, and then we're going to do the dicing on the same primitive. So that might be a little bit more optimized. I'm not sure why I didn't do that before. That's kind of cool. It would make sense. Let's see how far we get. Probably be something in the video I cut to this part. I didn't make a mistake. But maybe that's a bit more efficient. So that is that. So that's why we're not doing the subdivision on this node. And I think some nodes you can actually use groups to do the subdivision, but I haven't found the subdivision group on here yet. It's SOP create. SOP create import primitive definitions handling there. So you can actually create as many and have many groups in there. But the SOP create wasn't used. I was using the SOP network. So yeah, it depends on how you want to do this, I guess. Subdivision group would have been handy to have. Anyway, it's fine. So here we have now three variants, and you can see up here in the primitives, you've got this ability to kind of switch between those three. The textures, we didn't really use anything in the textures because we actually did author. We're like linking live from here into there. So there is a Copernicus network producing a height map, which is the chocolate pattern, if you remember this chocolate pattern procedurally, and that's going to be linked live into the shader. So when we publish this, that texture will be kind of baked down and shipped with the USD file structure, which is interesting. So that's kind of what we've got going off in here, is these two main ones that are going to go into the main commercial, and then two additional ones just to help me do some Lookdev. All right, so we will assign two materials. We'll assign a milk chocolate and a, what is that saying? Only component material node should be used after the component. Yeah. So that's kind of like why I did it the other way. So So I've just quickly jumped back to the previous setup. So in terms of materials, the material library, I have this going off, and I've chose to use, you have a choice really, because I'm using KarmaXPU for my rendering. Then you have a choice of like the Karma Material Builder. So is it the Karma Material Builder or the Material Builder X? So I've put this little description in here to try and figure out when is best. But in the long term, I would imagine if you're not sending this out of Houdini and you're going to always render with Karma, you could pretty much do everything with Karma Material Builder. So these didn't actually get used, but you could use one of these and do it. But I've chosen to use Material X because that would support other render delegates, and it would probably ship out of out of Houdini and be read in other DCCs that support Material X in USD. But it's kind of a little out of the scope for this project, so I chose to use Material X. And what I've done is I've created a network for creating the milk chocolate and the white chocolate, and it's really simple. It's literally loading in the rest position. I didn't. Yes, and then I'm creating a unified noise. So in fact, what we can do is we can hopefully render this as we start to show you what's going off. So if I just view the chocolate one here, for example, this is loading the milk chocolate up from here, and you can see I've got all the materials. So I've got the milk chocolate, the white chocolate, and the caramel and the pink caramel. So they both kind of live in here, so it gets assigned like so, and you can drag stuff in and it will kind of just work. Pretty straightforward that. So the materials themselves, when you jump in here, I am using one displacement shader here and sharing it across. So that means that this kind of positional stuff here, if I go in and show you, it's being loaded in as an image, and that's loaded in op stage assets chocolate egg op net height out. And if you remember, that is actually, I'll just quickly you quickly just jump back into this stuff here, and I created this cop network, and that's referencing this guy live. So that's quite interesting. You can kind of quickly reference that directly right into this displacement here like so, and then I'm just remapping it, and then the rest is just layered up subtle noises and things like that. Again, you can gain access to the HIP file on the Patreon site. It's not an award-winning setup at all. It was just something to give a little bit of variation. So this guy kind of applies this displacement in here. Then there's a little bit of uneven noise just to make it a little bit imperfect, and I'm using a couple of the masks to stop it from rendering around the edges, displacing around the edges in a weird way. Then I'm using another displacement and multiplying that against another mask. So you'll see that I'm bringing in these attributes here to kind of just apply it to this side. And you'll see this weird edge here, and that's because we probably need to let that resolve a little bit. The dicing is on 2 and 2, and kind of fix stuff like this. You might want to author maybe a little bit more dicing on the edges, and it will obviously take more memory and more RAM, or you could just improve the way you texture. But I just did this really quickly. So again, the this is just showing that you can mix between attributes on the geometry and apply your displacements off of certain integer attributes. So it's kind of just doing it along there like so. So you can kind of see that happening. So that material, I'm going to put that back to 2. Oops. Like so. But hopefully at least we've got something procedural. Now you don't have to do it procedurally, you know, you might just use your favorite painting program and favorite modeling program, but the egg is technically procedural, so you know you could pimp this up and have many different types of eggs, different types of colors, a bit like what I did with the asteroid. You could create an infinite procedural amount of these things, but you only needed 1, so just created 1. Then we went and did the same with the white chocolate, so it's essentially bringing in a uniform color, and I'm just mixing between just different patterns and things, different noises, and I'm just mixing them to get very subtle kind of shade differences in there. So if I press U and go up, you can see these are the actual exported nodes. What you see along here corresponds to what you see in your USD output, and they're the things that are actually assigned into these. So you can see, you know, the milk chocolate has the milk chocolate, and then it has the caramel, and this one has the white chocolate and the caramel. I'm not sure why I've named them weirdly like that, but yeah, yeah, it's probably fine. And the nice thing about that is we can add more flavors later on, and we'll do that. We'll finish the entire advert, and then we'll add a mint chocolate version and show you kind of how quickly that would be to do. So once this is all kind of authored in, what I would do is I don't really publish until I'm really happy that I want to send this out to someone or to myself or whatever. So I would add a camera, and all I've done is add a camera, and I've got a look at me constraint, and this camera is kind of constrained and looking at this. So I can position well, let me just show you. I'll look at the asset, and now we should be able to get that camera, and I can change the camera. You can animate this, do what you like, but I wouldn't animate it at this point here. But you can like nudge the rotation and zoom up, move up and down, zoom in and out, and do what you like, really. Don't know why there's a little bit of rotation on that. Might have been a mistake on my part, but just maneuver, you know, just move your camera how you like, and you'll see that it comes down here and it's grafted back on, right? So it's kind of grafted back on, because when this goes through your asset and it's published, this saves to disk, it'll come in here, and I will reference this back in. So just to show you that, I will do that. We'll keep the open effects, and we'll talk about this in just a second, because there's a little bit more going off in here. And this comes from our effects department as well. This is like linked live. So this is the advantage of kind of working in one scene for yourself. And it depends how integrated you want to make these, how reference based you want to make this data from one department to another, or whether you just want to put it on disk and load it in. It's completely up to you. But what I would do is I would publish this, and I would set like a default like so. So when we publish this, I've got a place I like to publish things, and again I've created this this link to here, this links to this. There is no shot, so I use the same controller for like my FX and stuff, so the shot will just be empty, even though there's actually a link here. I could actually just remove that, but it'll just have a double like a double / here, which won't affect how it's saved. So it's going to go into Patreon chocolate egg assets, asset modeling chocolate egg in its USD in a version, and I just kind of say this is derived by the asset name. So it's just kind of all linked in. So I would save this. And you can see this is now going to a nice place. It's kind of all kind of automated. Good. Save that. And that's actually going to have saved this into the asset, and it won't affect anyone because they're not technically using this version. But when I finish, normally I would disconnect this and republish, but I'm just going to leave it in for now to show you the reason. In fact, I will plug this back in here and show you like the problem you had at first when you first build something with internal structure and you can't see it. But the idea is that when you're trying to Lookdev this and you're at this stage, then you will essentially need to kind of switch out the variant. You can do this several ways. You can say, like, if you do the working variant up here, this will open up, but as soon as you bring it back here, this sets it to this default variant. So you could temporarily just move this to a open version, but that's the default version that people will load in. So just bear that in mind, because people may be just loading this in and suddenly their closed version may change to opened, and it could confuse them a little bit. And I do this to myself all the time, so just bear that in mind. So I tend to leave that alone, in fact, and leave it at closed. And then I move it through this switch node, which is doing nothing. It's still taking this the zero signal, the first signal. Whoopsie. Oh dear. That. That's Y. Can I snip that away? Oh. It's just, and then let's do a Control R to, is it Shift R to switch those around and plug them back in. I had a weird wire moment there. And then we're gonna, when this gets published, it removes the camera. So if we switch this to a published version, and rightly so, it will remove the camera because of this. It's going to take away, and this node does not want you to have the camera in there, and it's a good idea it doesn't have it in there. So I graph the camera back in and I set a frame range. So I still get the same camera, and I can switch between a live and a cache version. So now we're looking at the cache version and it's closed. So if I look at the live version, it's also closed, but you can see they should both kind of look the same when you're doing your Lookdev. Now we're not looking at any lights at the moment, so you might do this and then do that, and you can see we've got some, you know, geometry with the fracture line. This is the broken version, and hopefully if we switch this to well, any of these, I can switch this here and I can switch this variant up here to be, you know, the unbroken one. I could switch this to live, and then just to test this out, I could switch this to the unbroken one, and it should hopefully look the same, but it'll just remove the fracture line. So we're going to deal with that fracture line and how it appears later on. So just bear that in mind. So which one was it? Was it closed? That's the default with the fracture line. Yeah, I think it was. That's going to go ahead and do it. Now we have no lights. We're not viewing any lights in our USD structure at the moment. You can see them down here, but this display flag is kind of it's only evaluating this part of the USD tree structure at this point. We haven't added any lights or anything. So this frame range here is really nice, because if you have this guy on, sets frame range drives the play bar range. If you click that on, then if you watch the frame range down here, watch it change. 25. Did you see that change? I'm going to hide that. Keep that in mind. Now the variant, I'm going to set my variants here. And if you're familiar with the set variant, you can choose your asset and you can choose as many variants as you want. So I chose geometry variant open, and then I've chosen material variant. And then that is, if I middle click, it's the milk chocolate. And this tops material variant is just something that's been derived further down here. So if I just let me think, if I generate the static work items, it's essentially going to be switching between these different flavors later on, and we'll explain why. So this is kind of driven by my top network. So you don't have to do it this way, but I like to render, like once I'm happy with something, I will render overnight. I'll just render as many frames as I want on a looping turntable. So you'll see that the actual thing loops around. So it's spinning, the lights are not moving, and you can set this up as however you want, really. Again, it's not the most amazing render, but I can put any AOVs in there, and that's all being done within the assets on this asset as like modeling / Lookdev texturing thing. So we then add this spin asset. So we start to get some spinnings. If I click spin here, this is a Xform node, and all I've done is add in an expression here. So I'll let you have a look at that expression. And this is going to allow me to do a start rotation, and it'll allow it to spin. And if I don't spin, then it doesn't do anything. I can just move it around like so. If I look through the camera, there's no spinning. If I click spin, there's spinning. So you can change the speed, and more or less it's going to try to, if you go like twice the speed for some reason, it's going to try and loop it around based on your frame range. So you can get what you like here. You might want to 101 frames, and you can see it's going to change that now. And that's the frame range that will be rendered, and that's the speed that will be rendered. So that was just something I did as a quick, like, I just want something to, I want this to spin around. And then you can do the same with the lights. So in this case, I sometimes render back and forth. Now in the more advanced tutorials, it's going to render, like, it's going to do both. It's going to spin, stop, and then spin these guys as well. So it would essentially render maybe 50 frames of your asset, like spinning round, freeze, and then the light would spin round. So you'd get a nice kind of representation of how the surfaces are being reacting to different lighting conditions and stuff. So here I've added a null for my lights. So you'll notice I just add my lights by and they just go in like a default. So you just hit tab, choose your lights, drop them in, and label them however you like. And I create this light here, and I just change the icon. So down here, I just change this to a cross, and then I turn the light off. And that's because when you render with your lights and you add them into the hierarchy, so I've added these in to the hierarchy. So you'll notice the lights are in here, and I put them kind of where I want them. So I could, put them anywhere I like in my structure there. Just added them in, and I add the ref balls. So the lights can spin, and it's exactly the same setup really. Give or take a few names. There's nothing different in here. So I could now spin the lights and get the same results and render that, and just kind of get a quick feel while I'm Lookdeving. So I could keep my display down here while I'm Lookdeving, and you'll get like kind of a nice, there it comes. You can kind of see I can spin the lights around, and you can pick up any of these environment lights from HDR Avon and things like that. And I think I converted all mine to Ace's color space and then converted them to RATs. And I think I do have a few tutorials about that as well. So you get the right kind of color space. It's a very intense light rig, this. You will also notice that on each light, I am using the LPE tag to $OS. So it's going to just name the AOV like ENV, and it's just going to name the lights. I've only got one light. I've got one environment light really, and then it's spinning around. So it's again totally optional. It's just a way of getting some lighting on your model as you're authoring things, and you might be in your materials tweaking things and then spinning and getting that interactivity and playing with things, and then you won't have any AOVs at this point because you've got no render settings, but you might then want to progress down and do that. So just going back to this light here, if I don't have any lights in my scene at all, Houdini creates a light that you don't see in the USD structure called a headlight. It's just it's like an old Houdini thing, and that might be useful for you. But if I render now, you get this flat lighting. But if I switch this light on here, which is set to 0, nothing happens. And that's quite nice because you can turn the sunlight on, for example, and isolate lights without, then you can turn that off and it goes black, and you can switch your environment light back on. Eventually that loads in and you get your environment light. Well, so you can do quite a lot of things, and that just felt quite useful to me. So that's the lights. Add as many as you want. The nice thing is you can have as many environments, so environment's got 1 or 2 or 3 with different maps, and it will look really bright. But when you render with this on and you render different AOVs split out, you can actually extract, if you were just rendering with an environment light, you can actually extract different environment lights into different passes, either in Nuke or in Copernicus or Slap Comps. And I have explained that in some other tutorials as well, where I rendered spinning. I think really last year sometime I was kind of getting my head into all the USD and how I might use it. I rendered a spaceship spinning around with, I think it was 3 environments. There was like a cloudy, an overcast, and an overcast one, direct sunny light, and a studio environment map, HDRI map. And I just rendered them all into one beauty, but they were split out into 3 different AOVs. Then they were defined by the light tag here, so I could split them out and just see one render. I could split it out and just see my asset under different lighting conditions and make sure it felt balanced and correct. This is not in this tutorial, but again, this is the basic setup, but we're going to be doing more advanced stuff. But I just thought it'd be interesting to do a really basic setup for just a really quick test like this, because the asset's hardly anything worth writing home about. So next up, I added a floor, and I think it's just SOP create. What did I do? Oh yeah, just gave it like a backdrop in here. So I did some stuff and created a name, because the name's gonna be what gets called in here. Added some materials, and that was that. And that's kind of like a throwaway thing. So I just added the floor in to the hierarchy. You can see it there, and I'm not even being tidy at this stage because at this stage this doesn't go anywhere. It's only this that I want to go into my project. So this is just for me to visualize and maybe present stuff to someone, client or yourself or another colleague. So yeah, you can do things. I don't think I actually made this work, but this would actually put the background underneath the asset. But I didn't need that. I just created a little bit of a gap there. So that was it really. I created AOVs. Now I like to create my AOVs separately on the second input, just so I can bypass different ones. So if you're denoising, I think depending on your denoiser, so in my case, if I start to render now with the lights and the render settings, you're going to be rendering this background and these render settings, and you should now see all of the passes as well. That it might help you with Lookdev and lighting and things as well. But now you'll get all your AOVs and your utils. So I put my crypto mats on one pass. I'm just using the standard material and primitive, which is the objects, for now. So it's not doing anything, too fancy. You've got the materials, primitives, so you can kind of see that thing going off, and it's just rendering the whole thing. And yeah, so, and I've got utils as well on a separate thing, and probably for final rendering the utils might be in a separate renderer. I'm not sure yet. Sometimes you can get quicker renders and you need different render settings for things like that, but for now I'm just rendering them here so I can kind of look at, and I've just switched on nearly all of them just to help me debug. And then some ones for compositing, so I'm not really splitting per light at the moment, apart from this one, which is the beauty. So if I had multiple lights, in fact, let's take a look. Did we actually get that right? You would get if you had multiple lights, it would reflect this in here. So for example, environment of 1, it's just alt. Let's just do an alt. Environment of 2. Obviously, you're going to have all the lights visible. I'm hoping there's a texture map there for this. So yeah, that's a different environment map. You can see on the reflection spheres, whoops, and it's a different environment map. So I could switch that on. And now you've seen 2 reflection maps. And then hopefully we can get those to come out in the renderer as well. So I'm not seeing that at the moment. So probably something to do with a okay, maybe I need to switch that one on. And then you should get an individual render for just the environment. So if you're just using one light, you could see both environment lights as well there. And then for denoising, you can actually denoise the AOVs that you need by coming to filters. You can specify the AOVs you would like to denoise. So I think you can do stuff like this and it will denoise that AOV as well. So if you do split them up in comp, especially for lighting or rendering, it'll have a denoised AOV as well. So that's quite interesting. So if I go back to the color, it's going to look very bright. So I'll just hide this guy and there we are. So we've got this kind of turntable. The lights are now moving around, but I think I'm going to not spin the lights. I think I'm just going to I'll probably find, did we get the right map? Yep, I think I'm going to find a nice position for the lights, maybe straight on, and then I'm going to spin that and spin it at spin speed 1. And while I'm setting this up, I would turn this off, and I probably just want to render like 50 frames like that. You'll notice timeline, and you'll notice that the spinning all updated as well, the speed updates, and that's because of this expression in here. So again, it's more like your own, it's up to you really how you want to do this, but I felt like, is this going to be something I can just quickly drop down as a recipe, and just start working things through, because the most of the work happens here and in here, and then the rest is stuff that you can add or remove as you need to. So there we go. So then you can add render settings here and a switch node, and you can switch between different render settings. So if I view here, you can see the strong wire. I'm viewing the 0 connection. And then if I was to render this, I could then, for example, edit my render settings and half the resolution. So I've copied this little wire here. I've actually copied my resolution here, and I've just basically done a divided by 2 on it, and this one's divided by 3. I disable the motion blur. So if I'm wanting to do something really quick and just test this is all working, I can switch this to like 1, like so, and then going off, add parameter reference camera, that's it. Maybe this one's broken. It is indeed. Oh, I know what this is. Oh, I see. Okay, quickly delete those channels. You could take your master resolution. So this, I'm going to set this manually to be whatever resolution I want. I'm going to copy this. I don't usually render very high res for myself for tests. I just want to get stuff out and see the basics. And I think even this resolution, you know, I'm on a HD monitor, and this is kind of like standard HD, isn't it? A small HD, and it's enough to give you some feedback. And you can see it was like a minute, nearly a minute a frame. And that was rendered on this setting, on the master setting at 512. So with denoising on the AOVs and stuff. So you can kind of at least get a feel for your asset. So if you wanted to speed things up and not change things, you can do this render settings here. So you can copy this, maybe paste relative references. Same with this, paste relative references. And then hopefully it's, what is going off? Something with the camera, it was broken. So I'm going to copy that, and you don't have to reference stuff in. I'm going to paste the camera in, and then hopefully that's going to fix that. So we have got the same camera and the same resolution, but I can do a divide by 2 on here. Click on this and do a divide by 2 on here. And now it's proportional, but it's half the res. And then here I could probably have this as the very low render settings, very low, divide by 3. So it's going to be quite small. Divide by 3. So you get this. I'm going to disable the motion blur. And now I've got this, I'll just do a save. I've got this kind of like cheaper render where all I'm doing is changing the resolution. So furthermore, you might want to start to edit render settings furthermore. So if you go into the Karma, you have all the render settings, change some of the render settings here. So I've chose to just disable a couple of the more expensive things on the very low one versus the very high one. Then you could change your render samples as well, not to be 512. So you could say path trace samples could be half that as well if you really wanted. Yeah, it's right here under global. So the path trace samples is actually linked, and then I've just done a divide by 2. Same here as well. I sometimes get a little bit lost in all of these. There's so many nodes and parameters in Houdini, it's kind of impossible to remember everything. So what that means is I can switch to this render, and I could just render this. So I could render the frame range from stage, which is going to respect what this is kind of controlling based off of that frame range. So it means that we are going to render just those 50 frames, very small. And I'm going to just chuck this into a folder. And as you can see, I am rendering to this directory. Op name is basically going to return this chocolate egg. And then the @tops material is going to return the variant that switches. So the variant switches here twice, because we're going to do this in the top graph. So it's going to render this like twice. So we're going to end up with a very low version of this, I guess, because we're going to quickly do this into a secondary folder, sorry, into another version here, like that. We've got version 2, and we can go in here and take a look at what's going off. And I'm wedging, so I'm creating 2 wedges, and I'm writing the variant name as it should be. That's defined up here, and you see this where my error is with the variants. There's milk chocolate, and then there's white chocolate. So you just need to know the names. Then I'm creating my own top variant here. So that's the that's the attribute I'm going to take out. So you'll see that it's going to render 2 versions of this. It's going to take this render node, the asset USD render. If I click on here, we go back up out of this top graph. We land on this node. So it's going to control this, and it's going to render this twice for each material variant. So there's really fancy stuff you can do here. So if I start to render this now, I would kind of fire off the render in this case using this top graph. So I would dirty or generate static and cook the output. That would cook through here into this low quality version into a directory. So let's do that. And it's going to look naff because it's going to be very low res settings and stuff, and it's not very representative of how the asset should look because of the settings we've used. We've changed a couple of the bounce lighting and things. Maybe on the very low one, we've removed some of those settings. Which one is it there? We've dropped some of them down. So just bear that in mind. But this is down to you to make as many of these as you want, however you want. If we render this now, a couple more things. I'm rendering without motion blur because I just don't really need this. And it's going to be spinning quite quick, and I just want to see the model move around. So in other tutorials, we'll look at rendering two versions with the light rig spinning and then the asset spinning for each material variant or geometry variant. And we'll also look at creating a contact sheet either in Copernicus or just in standard using Houdini's standard stuff, or even a slap comp rather than putting it into Nuke. But you could just put your renders into Nuke and have that there. But it would be nice to come in the morning and have everything rendered and a little contact sheet and some information about it. But this is not in this tutorial, but this is like the foundations of that. That will be coming soon. Improve viewport material preview. Yeah, it's because it's not brown on the edge, but this seems to be the preview of the caramel always seems correct. If I click on this, you'll see that it goes from a different white chocolate up here to the milk chocolate, but you see the outside it is changing. But because I'm doing my materials, by the way, I think this is still all live, but my materials are sharing this displacement, and whenever I put a displacement in, whether it's inside of here or here, it seems to remove the color visibility, and I don't know why. So for example, milk chocolate, I take that off, you can see it is actually milk chocolate, but when I put my displacement on, it disappears. It still renders fine, but I'm not entirely sure why. And I tried it with the armor material, and again, it's the same thing. So I don't know at this stage. So we're going to render this. Before I do render that, this is going to have this mplay monitor switched on. Now, normally if you don't have this on, it will just render to disk, and you won't see anything happening, and it's probably a little bit more efficient. That's one way, but just for this tutorial, I'm going to keep mplay on, and I'm going to dirty or generate stat and cook, save, and it's going to cook this animation. It's going to cook this one, and then it's going to switch over to this color, and it's going to render that one. So it's going to save this to disk and then return it into an mplay monitor as well, which is what this is doing. Also in rendering, in the render settings, I think, what did I do? This might be rendering to this. Yeah, so this is what I did earlier. And then this is the quick version here. It's fairly quick. It's going to be half the res, as you can see, and slightly lower samples as well. And that's going to get saved to, if we go right up to the top of the project, where we've got the Patreon folder, chocolate egg, and it goes to renders. It's going to be a 3D render from Houdini. My projects are very kind of multi DCC really. I'm sometimes using Blender, and I'm sometimes using Substance Painter and stuff. So same with the edit and the comp. I use a few different comping tools. So I kind of keep the project kind of generic, and then 3D goes into Houdini or Painter, for example, and you'll see all my 3D stuff in there. But for renders, I decided to kind of say it's a 3D render. It's coming from Houdini, and it's coming from the modeling department, which is where we're saving to. And then it's this asset. And then I don't go any further than that, but you could go a little bit further with how you want to partition off folders. I've got the milk chocolate and the white chocolate. So let's see, I think, is it the white chocolate that's rendering out first and the low res thing? It's a bit overblown because the light rig was tweaked, but hey, it doesn't matter. The white chocolate is rendering to version 2, and there it is. So you see the one I did before is the high res one, which is what you were seeing here as well. So, and also to speed things up, you don't necessarily have to render the lighting ref. You could do a 1-frame render and composite that on after the fact. Also, you don't have to render the background. You might want to just render 1 frame of the background and even your shadows separately, and then you could composite those, and it would actually be a little bit quicker to render as well. So nothing amazing in terms of the asset, but you can see like it's a workflow. So you can see we're rendering this, and that's hard to Lookdev something when you don't have a surface that represents like the effect. So that's pretty much what you'd start with. You just put a shader in there, and you can see it didn't quite work, look, but we've put a shader in and it's off its rendering until we go to effects, and then effects can kind of pass us back a frame, which could be this, and that would help Lookdev. So then you could plug that in, and when you're really happy with everything, you could disconnect that and only deliver and publish the variants, geometry variants and the material variants that are actually beneficial to you. So that's pretty much a quick, I think that's a quick overview of everything. So if you wanted to only render particular sequence, particular material variant, maybe this all finished and you did some more Lookdev on the brown material or something, and you wanted to render it again and you didn't change anything, if you just right click on one node and you cook that work item, it will cook just that sequence. So you'd end up with the milk chocolate sequence be rendered again into the same directory, unless you chose to version up. So yeah, that's pretty much the kind of little asset workflow I've got here. So depends on how complicated your asset is and how much, you know, work you want to do in there. But this is like my quick template I dropped down to get something out. In this case, a very badly modeled asset, which didn't take too long. But once you've got this in place, I'm hoping you can expand on it or suggest some other ideas. But I also have new ideas as well. So this is already kind of the basic setup. So after that, we're going to quickly jump out into layout. So we're going to publish this. We'll let the render finish. We'll publish this, and we'll move into actually using this in a commercial or our fake advert. So yeah, so that's the end of the assets section. So join me in the section 2, the layout.